Hi, I'm Carl Franklin. As you may have heard, MAUI has officially been released. I've been holding off on doing any kind of MAUI app authentication and authorization episodes because it seemed like a moving target. But last week at the .NET Conf Focus on MAUI event, Microsoft gave a demo of using the Microsoft Authentication Library, or MSAL, to do just that. Now, it took quite a bit of research to figure out exactly how to set things up in Azure and use MSAL in a MAUI app, but I've got what I think is a good way to get started. We're going to use Azure AD B2C to authenticate any user with an account for Windows, Microsoft, Skype, or Xbox, and call a secure API from a MAUI app. In subsequent episodes, we'll dive further into different auth scenarios, but this is a great first step. Authentication with Azure AD B2C and MSAL is coming right up on the .NET Show. All right, just a note before we get started. Everything I'm going to show you right now, you can do step by step in my repo at github.com/carlfranklin/MSAL auth in MAUI. So in this episode, we're going to build a secure ASP.NET Core Web API application and deploy it to Azure. Then we're going to build a .NET MAUI app, and I'm going to show you how you can leverage the Microsoft Authentication Library, or MSAL, for .NET to get an access token, which we're going to use to call the Web API application. MSAL allows you to acquire tokens from the Microsoft Identity Platform, authenticate users, and call secure web APIs not only from .NET, but from multiple platforms such as JavaScript, Java, Python, Android, and iOS. So yes, we are going to create an API, and we're going to secure that, and we're going to use Azure AD B2C to authenticate against Microsoft users. So anyone with a Microsoft account can log in using their account to our MAUI application. It's outside the scope of this episode to talk about Google, Facebook, Twitter, or even just email and password authentication, but I will cover that in subsequent episodes. So the first thing we're going to do is create an ASP.NET Core Web API application. We're going to call it Secure Web API. Now I'm going to uncheck this box right here, Use Controllers, because we're going to use minimal APIs. And also you notice that by default, Enable Open API Support is selected, so we can use Swagger. So I'm just going to run this, make sure it works, and I'm going to expand Get Weather Forecast. I'm going to click Try It Out, and I'm going to click Execute, and look at that. We get some nice, interesting weather data coming back from the API. Whoop-de-doo. That's not the important part. The important part is we can secure it. But before we even do that, let's just take a look at Program CS here. And if you remember the Minimal API episode, this should look very familiar. We've got all the code right here in Program, including the handler for weather forecast. So we don't need controllers. We just have this very simple handler with map-get. All right, now we're going to make it secure. So I'm going to go to the package manager, and I'm going to install a few packages. Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.Authentication.JotBearer, Microsoft.Identity.Web, Microsoft.Identity.Web.MicrosoftGraph, and Microsoft.Identity.Web.UI. Let's just go look at the project. Yep, everything there looks good. Let's go back to Program. We're going to add a couple of using statements. Now we're going to configure this and make it secure. So right here, this is what we got. We're calling Builder Services Add Authentication using the JotBearer authentication scheme. We're adding Microsoft Identity Web API And yes, we're going to add some stuff to the config. You'll see that in a minute. We're going to call enable token acquisition to call downstream API. That's kind of important. We're going to add Microsoft Graph. We're going to add in-memory token caches. And we're going to add a downstream web API with this section downstream API in the config. And we're going to add in-memory token caches. So if you want to learn more about all of these things, there's a link in the repo to go into detail, but this will get you started. Now let's scroll down a little bit. Before app run, we're going to say use authentication and use authorization. Finally, in the map get with name get weather forecast, we're going to add this little ditty, require authorization. So this is kind of like putting an authorize attribute on an API controller, or in this case, on an endpoint. Now, config is what it's all about. In your config file, we're going to put all of the things that we need to do authentication and authorization. So right up here, I'm going to add a series of fields. Azure AD is a section. So we have these variables right here that we're going to fill in. And before we can do that, we need to go to Azure. So I go to portal.azure.com and I sign in. Now I'm going to search for Azure AD B2C. There it is right there. Now, if you don't have an Azure account, you can sign up for free, and there's a link in the repo as for how to do that. Or you could just Google Bing, sign up for free Azure. So this is what we want right here, app registrations. So click on that. I've got a few applications registered already. I'm going to click New Registration, and it's going to be called MSAL Auth in MAUI. Now we have some options here for supported account types. Let's go with this one right here. Accounts in any organizational directory, any Azure AD directory, which is multi-tenant, and personal Microsoft accounts like Skype or Xbox. So that means anyone with any Microsoft account can log into Microsoft and be authenticated in your application. Okay? Now let's go down to redirect URI, and we want to select a platform of public client/native mobile and desktop. And for the URL, we're going to type MSAL auth in MAUI : //auth. Good enough. Let's register. All right. So here we've got a lot of information that we're going to need in our config. For example, the client ID, the application ID. Let's copy that to the clipboard, and that goes right here in the client ID. The directory, or the tenant ID, we can copy that into the tenant ID. We're going to set the instance to https://login.microsoftonline.com, and the callback path is going to be /signin-OIDC. As for the domain, let's go back to the portal. We're going to go to branding and properties, and you see this publisher domain right here, which I have blurred out. I'm going to copy that, and that goes right here. Now we need to create a client secret. So we're going to click on certificates and secrets, and we're going to add a new client secret. For the client secret, let's add something like MSAL auth in MAUI secret, capital S. Now, the expiration, you can have it 6 months, you can have it whatever you want. I'm going to leave it at 6 months. Back here, that client secret goes right here. So it's interesting that the client secret only gets displayed right now. If you move to another screen, you won't be able to retrieve the value anymore. So you might want to store this safely at this point in Azure Key Vault or some other safe location, because if you lose it, you'll have to create a new client secret. All right, for the scopes value, we're going to set this to access_as_user. Access as user. Now we're going to the Authentication tab in the portal, and under Mobile and Desktop Applications, we're going to check the redirect URIs. That'll be this one here and this one here. Now under Advanced Settings, we're going to click Yes to allow public client flows, and then click on Save. Okay, let's close that. Now I'm going to build and run Secure Web API again. I'm going to go to Get, try it out, execute, and wah, wah, wah. 401 error. But that's what we expected because we said that we require authentication. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is deploy this thing to Azure. So I'm going to right click on the project, select Publish. I'm going to select Azure, Azure App Service Windows. I'm going to create a new app service. It's going to be called MSAL Secure Web API. Resource group will create a new one, RG-MSAL Auth in MAUI. And you pick your subscription and your hosting plan accordingly. Okay, now I'm going to click Next. Now for the API management option, we're going to skip that step. Click Finish. All right, that creates our published profile. Now we're ready to publish. Let's do it. Now you might get this error on publishing. If you look at the details, it says web deployment task failed, could not connect to the remote computer, yada, yada, yada. Make sure the process web management service is started on the remote computer. I'm going to show you how to fix that. Go to your web API resource and you can search for MSAL Secure Web API up here and then click on Configuration. And we're going to add a new application setting. It's going to be website_web-deploy_use_SCM. The value should be false. Click OK. Click Save. All right, everything's good. Go back to Overview. You need to download the published profile. Then back in Visual Studio, you can create a new profile and import it. You can see I've already successfully done it. Browse for the profile file that I just downloaded. It's in my Downloads folder. There it is. Select Finish, Close, and now we're ready to publish. Now we're cooking, and boom. And I expected this to happen. This is because, for security reasons, Swagger is only enabled running in development mode. So if we go up here and append weather forecast to the URL, you'll see the application is running, but we get a 401. So because we're not passing an access token. So this is all good news. All right, let's go back to our MSAL Auth in MAUI. All right, this is our app registration for Azure AD B2C, remember, where we had all our secrets and stuff. And we're going to go to Expose an API. And here we're going to add a scope. We're going to leave the default value for the application ID URI and click Save and Continue. Now we need to fill some things out. The scope name, remember we set that in the config file? It's access_as_user. Who can consent? Admins and users, not just admins only. Now we're going to have some descriptions here. For admin consent display name, we're going to say call the secure web API on behalf of the user. As for the description, allows the MSAL Auth in MAUI App to call the secure web API on behalf of the user. And for the user consent display name, we're going to say call the secure web API on your behalf, because that's what we're showing the user. And the user consent description allows the MSAL Auth in MAUI App to call the secure web API on your behalf. And I'm just noticing a couple of typos here. Well, one anyway. And the state should be enabled, and we're just going to add the scope. And you can see right here that that scope API has been created. So now we're going to click on API permissions so we can set the API permissions. And then we're going to click on add a permission. We're going to select my APIs, and you can see my other applications, but I'm going to select this one, MSAL Auth in MAUI. Now we need to select delegated permissions here and also access as user, the scope. And finally add permissions. And now you can see under MSAL Auth in MAUI, we have our access as user. And if you click on grant admin consent for whatever your tenant is minus Franklin's Net, you want to make sure that this is checked off. So if it's not checked off, click it, select yes. You want to make sure that's there. All right, we're done with Azure for the time being. Now let's create a new .NET MAUI application in the solution. And we're going to call it, guess what? MSAL Auth in MAUI. Now, at this point, if you get a firewall Windows Defender message that comes up, just select Allow Access. You might be asked to verify your iOS account with your phone if you have an iOS account, an Apple developer account, but just go through all of those things. So let's right-click on the MAUI app and select it as the startup project. We're going to go to main page XAML. And right here where this counter button is, I'm going to replace that with the following. It's a horizontal stack layout with two buttons. One logs in using your Microsoft account, of course, and the other logs out. And all this code is up in the repo, as I said before. Now we're going to use Android. In subsequent episodes, we'll use other things, but you can go back and see how we've used iOS, Android, Windows, and MAUI. Android is the most accessible. I also happen to have an Android phone connected to my PC. So if I go to Android local devices, you can see it right there. Let me see if I can bring it up on the screen. And here it is. I'm using an app on my Samsung phone called Link to Windows so I can see it. And you know what? Yes, I know. It looks a lot like a Windows phone. That's because I added a special program that makes an Android phone look like a Windows phone. Oh, you want the URL? Okay, here it is. All right, so we have some more work to do. I'm going to go to the Package Manager console. I'm going to select MSAL Auth in MAUI. And I'm going to install the package Microsoft Identity Client. Now I need a couple of support files. I'm going to create a new folder for them. So this folder will be called MSAL Client. And in there, I'm going to add two classes. The first one's PCA Wrapper, and the second one's called Platform Config. Finally, I'm going to go to the main page XAML CS file and replace it. I'm also going to open the Android manifest under Platforms, Android manifest. I'm going to change some things in here that I need for authentication. I'm also going to open main activity and overwrite that. Okay, now let's start filling in some values. Let's go back to PCA Wrapper. Right here, this authority string, we're going to replace this with the tenant ID. And if you recall, all of that stuff is in app settings JSON. Here's a tenant ID, blurred for my protection right there. I'm going to replace the tenant ID here. Now I need the client ID. Replace this here. Replace that there. Now we need to go back to the Azure Portal. Click on Authentication, and we're going to add a platform. We already have the mobile and desktop applications, but we need to add a web application. Now this redirect URL is going to be /signin-OIDC, but it's also going to need the qualified AzureWebsites.net domain. So in another tab, I've brought up my MSAL Secure Web API, and this is the URL for that. So back here, my redirect URL is going to be MSAL Secure Web API .azurewebsites.net /signin-OIDC. We want to check both of these off down here. These are the tokens that we want to be issued, both access tokens and ID tokens. Click Configure. So let's run the application. All right. So you might get some prompts to accept Chrome conditions, turn on sync, multi-factor authentication. If you have it set up, accept all the app conditions. But we didn't get that, so I'm going to try logging in. All right, so this is my account from Microsoft. And there's a reason why we got this right here. It's the company name, it's this URL right here, msauth.com company name, and I'll show you where that is. It's in main activity right here. So this can be anything really. It's saying com company name because this should probably be your domain name, right? So if it was the .netshow.com, com.the.netshow.application, and then this this GUID right here. But whatever it is, we're going to go back to the portal, and we're right here in mobile and desktop applications, and we're going to add that URI right here, okay? And save. Now let's give it another shot. Yay, we got an access token. Good. Now, the next step, let's call the secured API. First, I'm going to log out. All right, over on the main page, under the horizontal stack layout, I'm going to add this button, Get Weather Forecast button, which means the code behind has to update also. Okay, and if you scroll down past the login, log out, you'll see the on Get Weather Forecast button clicked, which calls Call Secure Web API, which uses an HTTP client to get a request message. And this is the URL to our API. So this obviously should change, and you should really put it in a config file. But just for the purpose of the demo, go ahead and hard code it, test it out, and then move it to a config file. That's another show. Now let's run it one more time. All right, we got our token. Now call Get Weather Forecast. There it is. Now, I know it doesn't look pretty. However, this is the result of an API that has Auth set up on it, and you can only access it if you have the right access token through this whole process that we just did. So now you know how to configure Azure to support MSAL, authentication to get a token, and also secure a web API and pass that token to the web API, and it's only going to return values and not a 401 if you're authenticated. In subsequent episodes, I'm going to show you how to do authentication with Google and Twitter and Facebook and your own email addresses and passwords in a MAUI application, all of that stuff. And we'll also try it on other platforms, iOS and Windows. And that's it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching. Please visit blazertrain.com and the.netshow.com for more great content.